Okay, so chapter 2 is all about charts and graphs. So these are ways to visualize the data, which is really important because these visuals will tell you a lot of information about the data. So we were looking at four main types. We have nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. So categorical versus quantitative. And if the data has not been summarized, we usually refer to that as the raw data. So the original data or the raw data. And if we have organized the data, we call that grouped data. And particularly if it's been organized into a frequency distribution. So what is a frequency distribution? A frequency distribution is a summary of the data that is presented in the form of class intervals or frequencies. So basically, frequency is how often do those observations occur. So we're going to learn here how to construct a frequency distribution of a given data set. So first you need to decide on the number of classes you want to have. And this is an arbitrary number. There's no rules to follow. It can be any number, but it should probably not be less than 5. Because if you were to plot less than 5 class intervals, it's just going to probably not give you the detail that you want. You won't be able to see the shape if it's a histogram, how spread out the data is. It's just too sparse. And if you do more than 15 classes, then you will have, it might be too busy. And just too much detail to take in, and it's not really necessary. So you can decide on the number of classes using also the class width. So if, let's say you want it to be 6 classes, then you can decide how wide each class should be, and each class should be exactly the same width. So what you do is you determine the range of the data set. So the range is the formula, the maximum value of your data set, subtract the minimum. So we are talking about quantitative data here. So the range again is the maximum number, subtract the minimum number in your data set. If you then divide that by the number of classes you wish to have, then you can get an approximate class width. So for example, let's say you have a range of 51 and you have decided you want, say, just arbitrarily 6 classes. So you're going to take the range 51 divided by the number of classes you wish to have, and that ends up being 8.5. If you were to round up to a convenient number, now rounding up would give us 9, but most of the time when we are working with quantitative data, we usually like to have like a nice round number like 10. It's a nice, easy, it's an easy interpretable number, and it's really nice to have the class width to be equal to 10. Okay, so the midpoint of each class interval is called the class midpoint or the class mark. And to get the midpoint, you take the beginning of the class endpoint, add that to the ending of the class endpoint. So the beginning class endpoint and then the ending class endpoint, if that makes sense, and then divide that by 2, and that will give you the midpoint of that class. The relative frequency is just the proportion of the total frequency that is in any given class interval in a frequency distribution. So if you take how often that observation occurs within that class, divide it by the total number of observations. That will give you your relative frequency, or sometimes we call it simply the proportion. Then we have the cumulative frequency. And the cumulative frequency is the running total of frequencies through the classes, starting from the lowest. And then it increases. And then finally, the cumulative relative frequency is the running total of the relative frequencies through the classes of a frequency distribution. So we're going to build one. we're going to use this data set right here. And there are 50 observations. So there's no context. You can assume these to be ages if you want, or just basically raw data that has been collected and recorded. And this is your data set. And you can then look at it and so you can see or find what is the largest value. So it turns out that 74 is the largest value, and the smallest value is 23. So if you take 74, subtract 23, you get 51 is the range. So 51 in this case would be the range of this data set. And if we take that and divide by 6 like we did earlier, we get 8.5. But because 10 is a nice round number, it's easy to follow. The width is a nice, 9 just doesn't seem to be intuitive, so 10 is nice. And so we can have class widths of 10. So I've decided to, now you have to keep in mind, 23 is the smallest and 74 is the largest. If I take this table, we can then build a frequency distribution. So the class intervals, we start, I've already started this off for you. So 20 to under 30, and then the next class interval would be 30 to under 40, 40 to under 50, 50 to under 60, 60 to under 70, and 70 to under 80. So you can see how nice that works when we use class widths of equal to 10. So here we have a total of 6 classes, or 6 class intervals. And then to get the frequency of the first class, so you need to look at the raw data and go, okay, 20 to under 30. So let's go back to the raw data, and you just look for all the values in the data set that are between 20 to under 30. So you don't want to include 30 because 30 can only be in one class. It can't be in 2 classes. There's a number 30 there. So that will be counted in the second class, not the first. Okay, so you add those all up and determine the frequency for each of those 6 classes. Then from there, you total them, get the total number of observations. I think we already said it was 50 observations. Then you can then determine from there the relative frequency for each class interval. And from that, you can then calculate the cumulative frequency for each class interval. And finally, you can calculate the relative cumulative frequency for each class interval. And then you have what you need. If you can finish, what I'd like you to do is finish this table, see if you can complete it from the raw data. And what you're doing is you're turning this raw data set into grouped data, into a frequency distribution. And then we're going to look at some plots that I have made based on this data set. So in the next video segment, we'll go through on how to complete the table. But I would like you to try to complete the table first before you look at the next video, and then you can compare and see how you did.